Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video and commenting where you're watching from. Now, let's dive into these chilling stories. My name's Claire, and I'm the kind of person who finds solace in the little things. A cup of tea, a quiet night in, an old crime documentary to get my mind off the daily grind. I had settled on the couch, flicking through channels, when the storm hit. Not your average California drizzle, but one of those storms that felt like the sky itself was coming undone. The rain battered against the house so hard it nearly drowned out everything else, including the usual hum of the neighborhood. The power flickered twice before settling into a dim, unreliable hum, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it went out completely. I tried to focus on the documentary, pushing aside the nagging thought that maybe I should have checked the windows. There was something about the storm that felt wrong, too intense, too violent, but I shrugged it off. Thunder cracked outside, and I leaned forward to adjust the volume when I heard it. A sound from upstairs. At first, I thought it was just the storm, or maybe the house settling in its foundations. But then the sound came again, the unmistakable rustling of a window, as if someone was trying to open it, deliberately. My heart skipped a beat. I paused the TV, sitting motionless, trying to listen through the noise of the storm. Nothing. Silence, except for the wind and rain. It could have been the trees outside scraping against the house, I told myself. But there was an odd feeling in the pit of my stomach, a feeling that told me something wasn't right. I got up slowly, moving to the front door to check the lock. Secure. Then the back door. Locked too. I pulled aside the curtain and peeked out into the rain-slicked backyard. It was pitch black, the only light coming from the occasional flash of lightning. The fence swayed slightly in the wind, the grass heavy with rain. I tried to shake it off. My nerves were just on edge from the storm, that was all. I returned to the couch, pressed play, and tried to get back into the documentary. But then I heard it again. Louder this time. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the storm. Someone was messing with the window upstairs. My heart pounded in my chest as I grabbed the first thing I could find, a heavy metal flashlight, and moved toward the staircase. My thoughts raced. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe I had left the window open earlier. The storm could be playing tricks on me, making everything seem more ominous than it really was. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The power flickered again, and for a moment I thought the lights would go out completely, plunging the house into darkness. I swallowed hard and crept up the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, and I could hear my own breathing, sharp and ragged in the silence. The house felt too still. The storm outside felt distant now, muffled as though I were in a bubble. At the top of the stairs, I stood frozen. The hallway stretched out before me, the faint glow of my bedroom nightlight spilling into the corridor, and then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a window sliding open, just barely, coming from the guest room at the end of the hall. My hand trembled as I raised the flashlight, my footsteps slow and cautious. There was something unsettling about the silence, the way the house seemed to hold its breath. It was as if the walls were waiting for something to happen. The door to the guest room was ajar, just a crack. I extended the flashlight toward it, and with a deep breath, I pushed the door open. The room was empty, but the window, there it was, slightly open, just an inch or two. I stepped closer, shining the flashlight on the sill. There were water droplets on the frame, and my stomach turned. Whoever had opened it hadn't bothered to close it all the way, hadn't finished what they started. I slammed the window shut and locked it, my hands trembling. My mind screamed for clarity, for an explanation, but it didn't come. That's when I saw them, wet footprints, barefoot, leaving trails of water across the carpet, leading away from the window. The blood drained from my face as I followed the tracks with my eyes. They led not just across the room, but into the hallway. Someone was already inside. Panic surged through me, and for a moment I considered running, but I couldn't. I had to be sure. I couldn't just hide in my room and wait for the police. I needed to know I wasn't being watched. I needed to know that whoever had gotten inside wasn't still lurking in the house. I checked the bathroom first. Empty. Then my bedroom. Empty. But the footprints, they were still there, leading farther down the hall, toward the staircase. I held my breath, my flashlight shaking in my hand as I crept toward the stairs. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I could feel my legs growing weaker with every step. At the top of the stairs, I paused, the storm roaring in the background, lightning flashing, illuminating the hallway in brief staccato bursts. And then I saw him. A man. Standing at the bottom of the staircase, staring up at me. He was soaked through, water dripping from his matted hair, his clothes clinging to his body like a second skin. And in his hand, he held a crowbar. For what felt like an eternity, neither of us moved. We just stared at each other, the chaos of the storm muted in comparison to the silence between us. Then, in one fluid motion, he took a step forward. My body moved on instinct. I swung the flashlight toward him, but it was too late. The blow missed, crashing against the wall as I stumbled backward in terror. The man lunged at me, his crowbar raised. I barely had time to react, throwing myself to the side, tumbling into the hallway. I don't remember much after that. Somehow I managed to scramble to my room and lock the door. I shoved my dresser against it with shaky hands, every muscle in my body screaming at me to stay quiet, stay still. I could hear him outside the door, trying the handle, shoving his weight against it. I gripped the flashlight, my breath shallow and panicked. But then, just as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. I don't know how long I waited, but eventually I forced myself to move. My phone, my only lifeline, was downstairs, lying on the couch where I'd left it when I'd first heard the strange noises. I wasn't sure if I should risk it. The house felt eerily still, and the storm outside raged like it was trying to swallow the world whole. But I had no choice. I couldn't stay locked in my room forever. I crept back toward the stairs, my pulse hammering in my ears. The air felt thick, suffocating. I peered out into the hallway, praying I wouldn't see him again. I made it to the staircase, and I slowly descended, every creak of the steps loud in the quiet. When I reached the living room, I grabbed my phone from the couch, hands trembling as I unlocked it and dialed 911. The operator answered calmly, asking for my location and what had happened. I could barely make sense of the words coming out of my mouth, but somehow I managed to explain. The sirens were faint at first, but they grew louder as I hung up, my mind reeling from everything that had just happened. By the time the police arrived, they found the back door pried open and the wet footprints leading out into the backyard. But the man, he was gone. They combed the area for hours, but there was no sign of him, no trace of where he'd gone. The detectives were cautious, saying it could have been an attempted break-in that spiraled out of control, but they didn't offer any real explanation. I don't know what he wanted or why he chose my house, but every time there's a storm, I can't help but think about that night. I've always been the type of person who likes to stay grounded. I'm not superstitious and I don't scare easily. But when things started happening in my house, I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about fear. I'm Kate, a 30-year-old freelance graphic designer. I've always enjoyed the quiet solitude of my little house in the suburbs. I live alone, well, except for Cooper. He's my German Shepherd, my constant companion. Cooper is about 4 years old, calm and composed for the most part, and generally avoids making a fuss. He's the type of dog who would rather nap by my side than bark at squirrels or strangers. That's why when he suddenly started growling in the middle of a thunderstorm, it got my full attention. It was one of those nights where the storm raged outside, rain slashing against the windows, wind howling through the trees, and thunder that shook the house to its foundation. I was curled up on the couch, scrolling through my phone, trying to ignore the racket outside. Cooper, however, was standing perfectly still by the basement door, his posture rigid. His usually relaxed tail was tucked between his legs, and his ears were flat against his head. It wasn't like him at all. "Cooper?" I called, my voice trembling without meaning to. "What is it, boy?" He didn't even look at me. His eyes were fixed on the basement door, and his low growl reverberated through the quiet house. I tried to brush it off. "It's just the storm," I reasoned. But Cooper wasn't having any of it. The growl deepened into something more primal, more intense. His body stiffened, his gaze unwavering. "Cooper, come on. It's just the storm," I said, getting up from the couch and walking toward him. But even as I approached, his growl turned into a sharp bark. I froze. That wasn't like him at all. Cooper rarely barked, and when he did, it was usually a single, disinterested woof when someone rang the doorbell or when he was trying to get my attention. But this was different. I knelt down beside him, trying to calm him. "It's okay, boy. It's just a storm." I tried to reach out, but Cooper pressed his body closer to mine, his growling never stopping. It was as if he was warning me. I glanced toward the basement door, and a sick feeling crawled up my spine. The basement light was on. I had a sudden flash of memory. I hadn't turned it on. I rarely ever went down there, and I was pretty sure the light wasn't on earlier. My first instinct was to brush it off. Maybe I had forgotten. But then again, I never left lights on when I didn't need them. Something about it felt off. I reached for the doorknob, but as my hand brushed against it, Cooper barked even louder, his paws pressing into my leg as if to stop me. "Cooper, stop," I whispered, but my voice quivered, and I knew I wasn't convincing anyone, least of all him. I took a deep breath and opened the door. A cold draft swept up the stairs as the basement light flickered ominously. The storm's thunder clapped loudly behind me, but even that couldn't drown out the sudden, oppressive silence of the basement. The faint smell of dampness, moldy and heavy, hit me almost immediately. It wasn't the usual earthy scent I associated with an unfinished basement. This was something older, more suffocating. I stepped toward the top of the stairs, my breath caught in my throat. "Hello?" I called, trying to sound braver than I felt. My voice echoed back to me like a ghost, swallowed by the dark. It was then that I heard it, faint, like a whisper in the wind, but unmistakable. The sound of breathing. I froze. It wasn't the storm. It wasn't me. The sound was slow, deliberate, and coming from somewhere below. My blood ran cold. "Is someone down there?" I called out, my voice louder this time, though it shook with fear. No response, only the steady hum of the storm outside and the creak of the house settling. The longer I stood there, the more certain I became that someone or something was down there. I couldn't move. The idea of retreating into the safety of the living room felt like the most sensible thing, but something deeper, some primal instinct, kept me rooted in place. Cooper wasn't giving up either. His growls were low, persistent, and sharp, his body rigid with tension. It was as if he was begging me not to go any further. I finally reached for the flashlight from the kitchen, my hands shaking as I fumbled to turn it on. I pointed the beam down the stairs, watching the light flicker and jitter as I descended into the basement. The air was colder than usual, the shadows deeper. Every corner of the room seemed to move with the play of the dim light, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I checked every corner, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The usual mess of old boxes, dusty shelves, and laundry machines were exactly where I'd left them. Nothing seemed out of place, nothing except the heavy sense of dread that hung in the air. Then, from the far corner, Cooper suddenly bolted forward, barking furiously. I swung the flashlight in his direction, my heart leaping into my throat as I saw what he was barking at. A crumpled up blanket lying behind the water heater, a blanket I didn't remember seeing earlier. My stomach dropped as I stepped closer, and the beam of light illuminated muddy footprints trailing from the blanket toward the stairs. The room seemed to constrict around me. I turned to head back upstairs, but just as I did, I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps, pounding up the stairs behind me. Before I could react, something, or rather, someone, lunged at me from the darkness. A large figure collided with me, knocking the flashlight from my hand and sending both of us crashing to the floor. He was strong, wild-eyed, and soaked through, like he'd been hiding in the storm for hours. Cooper was barking like a mad dog, his teeth snapping at the man's ankles, and for a second, I managed to shove him off. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest, and ran up the stairs as fast as I could. Cooper was right behind me, still barking and snapping at the stranger, keeping him at bay just long enough for me to slam the door shut. I didn't stop running until I was outside, knocking desperately on my neighbor's door, screaming for help. The police arrived shortly after, and they found enough evidence to confirm my worst fear. Someone had been hiding in the basement for hours. They discovered an old backpack, some food wrappers, and a makeshift bed beneath the stairs. The man had been waiting for the storm to cover his movements, probably hoping I wouldn't notice the strange noises. To this day, I can't shake the image of his eyes, wide, desperate, like a trapped animal. And every time Cooper growls at something unseen, my heart skips a beat, wondering if he's sensing that same presence again. I'd been expecting my car to break down for months. It was an old sedan, a model from the mid-90s, barely holding on. I had every intention of replacing it, but life, work, bills, unexpected expenses had kept me from putting any money toward a new ride. And so, there I was, driving home after a long shift, watching the odometer click higher, and knowing every mile was a gamble. That night, though, my luck finally ran out. I was on a stretch of road I knew too well, barren and isolated, a few miles outside of town. A night like any other, or so I thought. The rain had started hours earlier, but now it was coming down in sheets, like the sky had opened up and was dumping buckets. The wipers were at full speed, but they could barely keep up with the downpour. Visibility was nearly zero. The road ahead looked like a river, and the wind was pushing the car from side to side. I could barely make out the dashed line in the middle of the road. My headlights barely pierced the darkness. The trees lining the road, bent by the wind, looked like looming shadows waiting to swallow me whole. The storm made the world feel small, contained in a waterlogged bubble. I was about halfway home when the engine coughed. I glanced at the dashboard, no warning lights, but the car was sputtering. The lights flickered, the engine stuttered, and before I could react, the car lurched and then slowed, losing power. I hit the gas. Nothing, just a sickly hum as the engine gave up entirely. "Not now," I muttered, the words slipping out like a prayer. The car rolled to a stop, the engine giving a final sputter before it went completely silent. I sat there for a few seconds, my heart hammering in my chest. It was one of those moments when you think, okay, this can't be happening right now. I pressed my palm to the steering wheel, that half hoping the car would magically spring to life. But of course, it didn't. The rain pounded relentlessly against the roof of the car, and steam curled up from under the hood, even in the darkness. I grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment, shoved my jacket over my head, and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit me like a wall of cold, sharp as a knife, and in seconds, I was drenched. The flashlight beam wobbled in my hands as I tried to make out the engine. I wasn't a mechanic by any means. I didn't know what I was looking for. Loose wires, a snapped hose, anything that might explain why the car had given up on me. I hadn't even noticed the silence creeping in. The rain, the wind, everything around me was roaring, but there was a moment when I realized the world had gone still. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Then, a sound. At first I thought it was just the wind playing tricks, a low crunch like someone stepping on wet gravel. But it came again, closer this time. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand, cutting through the storm in a weak, wavering arc. There was nothing, just the dark, rain-blurred landscape and the swirling wind. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely rising above the storm. No answer. I hesitated. It was stupid. What was I thinking? I was alone, sure, but who else would be out here in the middle of a storm this fierce? Maybe a raccoon or an animal trying to take shelter. It was probably nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That's when I felt it, a sudden chill. The hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. The air around me seemed to thicken, as if I were being watched. A weight settled over me. I couldn't explain it, but it was suffocating. Every instinct I had told me to get in the car and lock the doors, but before I could move, I felt the force slam into me from behind. I was thrown forward, the edge of the hood digging into my ribs. Pain exploded through my side, and I heard the sickening crack of something. My ribs? The flashlight flew from my hand, spinning away, its weak beam flashing wildly across the wet pavement. I scrambled to get up, clutching my side, only to see a man standing there, his soaked figure towering over me. His face was hidden behind wet strands of hair, but his eyes, those eyes were wide, frantic, desperate. "Get away!" I shouted, my voice cracking from panic and pain. He didn't answer, didn't say a word. He just lunged. I stumbled backward, trying to dodge him, but my footing betrayed me on the slick pavement. My back hit the car, and for a moment I felt completely helpless. He grabbed me by the jacket, yanking me toward him with a strength that was both surprising and terrifying. My heart pounded as we struggled, my arms flailing, my head spinning with panic. I fought back, managing to break free, but that's when he turned his attention to the car. Without a word, he threw himself into the driver's seat. The door slammed shut. "No!" I shouted, pounding on the window, but it was useless. My fists just bounced off the glass. My heart was in my throat as the car, that old unreliable thing, sputtered and stalled. Then, on the second try, it came to life. It wasn't smooth. The engine coughed, choked, then roared, as if the car itself had been hesitant at first, but finally remembered how to work, almost as if it recognized him. His hands moved quickly, confidently, like he knew exactly how to handle this temperamental machine. The engine revved louder, and before I could even process it, he slammed the gear shift into drive and hit the gas. The car lurched forward, tires spinning as it kicked up water and mud, screeching against the wet pavement before it shot into the night, leaving me standing there, soaking wet, breathless, and trembling in the storm. I stood there, gasping, unsure whether I was still caught in a nightmare or if I just narrowly avoided something much worse. My phone was locked inside the car. He'd taken it with him. I had no choice but to start walking, hoping I could find help. 20 minutes passed before I saw headlights cutting through the rain. A police car. I waved it down, breathless, my body still shaking. The officer rolled down the window, concern flickering across his face as he asked, "You okay?" I quickly explained the situation, my voice still tremulous from the encounter. The officer nodded, his eyes darkening as he radioed in my description and the details of the car. We didn't drive far before we found it. My car, crumpled against a tree, the front end smashed in from the collision. The man, still soaked and disoriented, sat handcuffed on the ground except he got surrounded by 2 officers. The officers filled me in later. He was a drifter with a record a mile long. Theft, assault, violent behavior. I was lucky. My cracked rib was nothing compared to what could have happened. But every time I pass that stretch of road now, when the rain begins to fall heavy and fast, a part of me still remembers that night. The terror, the feeling that something was stalking me. and how close I came to losing everything. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.